Legend, icon, the industry standard for over 40 years, the SHURE SM58 professional vocal microphone could certainly coast on its reputation. But this is one legend whose story is still being written. Night after night, stage after stage, session after session. There's a reason the SM58 continues to be used, abused, trusted, and beloved by music industry giants the world over. In fact, there are a lot of reasons. It starts with the technology. SHURE invented it and continues to perfect it. Every unidirectional dynamic microphone that's followed the SM58 utilizes the same core components, but only the SM58 is hand-assembled to SHURE's rigorous specifications. Its bass roll-off and brighten mid-range help your voice cut through the mix. A consistent cardioid polar pattern minimizes background noise and reduces the possibility of feedback. And its custom-designed pneumatic shock mount virtually eliminates stage vibration and handling noise. So the only thing that comes through the SM58 is your voice, clear and true. But sound quality is only part of the SM58 story. Its tank-like toughness is the stuff to make roadies wax poetic. Built to military specs, the SM58 has been subjected to the sort of abuse that'll make Armageddon seem like just another day at the office. And it always keeps performing. It may end up with a dented grill, but that's by design. The grill acts as a crumple zone, protecting the cartridge inside without affecting the sound. And dented grills can always be replaced, or brandished with pride, like old battle scars. It's no wonder countless artists from across the musical landscape, from up-and-comers to bona fide superstars, trust one mic and one mic only. It's no wonder the legend of the SM58 just keeps on growing. For more information, visit SHURE.com.
Hello and welcome to a short tech talk that is more a birthday party today, and because it's the SM58 day. Today we have a special guest from directly from Chicago. The historian of SHURE, Michael Peterson, is with us. Thank you for joining us. And,
welcome, Andrea.
We have Barry Kassab from Dubai and Fali from India. Welcome, guys. Today we will talk about the history of a 58, some technical insight about it, but as well as we will talk about the family of a 58 that is made of the people who built it, and of other microphones that came before it or after that. So, Michael, my first question for you is, who can we say is the parent of who are the parents of the SM58? Who built it?
Yeah, well, we have to go back to Ben Bauer. He was born Benjamin Baumschweiger, 1913 in Odessa, Ukraine, and had an interesting path to get to the United States. When he was about 10 years old, his family moved to Poland. When he was 11, they moved to England, and when he was 12, he moved to Havana, Cuba, and the parents were waiting to get into the United States. So he actually went at age 16 to New York City to study English and also get his university degree. This is one bright guy. Eventually, he ended up at the University of Cincinnati, and he was getting an engineering degree in EE, electrical engineering. And fortunately, SHURE had a chief engineer who had also attended the University of Cincinnati. And so in 1936, they hired Benjamin Baumschweiger as a co-op student. And he would work 8 weeks at SHURE and 8 weeks, and then go back to the school for 8 weeks. So 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off. Eventually, in 1937, he was ready to come to SHURE. And he started at SHURE as a full-time employee at $15 a week in 1937. And believe it, at age 24, his first major invention at SHURE was the uniphase acoustical network. And that is what underlies how that with the SM58, or going back to the Unisphere 1, Unidyne 1, Unidyne 2, and Unidyne 3, they're all made directional because of this uniphase acoustical network. So Ben Bauer, he changed his name to Bauer later, worked at SHURE from 1936 until 1958 and had over 100 patents to his name. He was just astonishing, man. And then Ben had a person that reported to him named Ernie Sealer, and Ernie Sealer started at SHURE in 1954. And in 1959, he introduced the Unidyne 3, which of course is the underlying aspect of the SM58. So Ben Bauer is kind of the grandparent, if you will, and then Ernie Seeler would be the father. So those are the two names you need to know.
Okay, and what was this question is for my tech guy Fali. Why this invention was something so radically new, and why it changed? We can say now that it changed the world of dynamic microphones forever.
I guess up till that point, you only had microphones that were still omnidirectional, which means it just picks up audio from all over the place. And, specifically if you're on stage with a band, especially a loud band, that's not a really good thing. So this invention basically, did a couple of things. And the most important was, how do you get voice with like a good frequency response to come from the front of the microphone and nothing else, or as little as possible to come from the back or from the sides. I think without this, you can just compare it to singing on a live stage with a lapel microphone, and that would give you the answer as to why this was so important.
Yeah, I think that nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, that type of technology is still widely in use, and most of the dynamic microphones are still based on that.
On the uniphase, yes, pretty much virtually every directional microphone in the world, almost 100%, is based on that technology. So yeah, Ben really changed the world at age 24.
I had the chance during this past week to see an amazing TV show, and during many episodes I've been thinking of you, Michael, because the show is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Mm-hmm. It's the story of an American woman doing stand-up comedy, and the number of microphones from SHURE that I was able to see in the show is unbelievable. I went to some old catalogs to find out some of them. And do you want to tell us something more about the brothers, if we want to keep talking about the family of a 58, about the brothers, the younger brothers that came before the 58? Actually,
sure.
The older brothers.
Yeah, well, in 1939 we introduced the Unidyne 1. So that's the birdcage microphone. Some people refer to it as the Elvis microphone. For some reason, the internet likes to call it the Fat Boy. SHURE never ever called it the Fat Boy, but that was what was called. And from 1939 to 1951, that was the size of the microphone, and that was an immediate success because, as Fali said, you could put that on a stage, turn it up. Your game before feedback was better. It was just, it was just an amazing. That was a hit right when it came out. So in 1951, though, television was starting to get big. And the television people said to SHURE, well, we'd like that Unidyne 1, but it's too big, covers up too much of the face. So make a smaller one. And then we brought out the 55S, and S simply stands for small. So from 1951 all the way to 2020, now that's the size of the microphone that we made. And then in 1959, we came out with the Unidyne 3. Primary difference on that, though, that was an end fire. That was a microphone you talked into the end of it, not into the side of it. And that was a huge change because it allowed you to have the polar pattern being uniform at all frequencies, and no matter, and that basically, rock and roll was coming out then. Turned out the Unidyne 3 was great for that. So Unidyne 1, Unidyne 2 from 20 years, right? 1939 to 1959. The Unidyne 1 and Unidyne 2 dominated. And that's why they choose it for Mrs. Maisel, because it's all set in the 50s. And that was the microphone, the Unidyne 1 or the 2. That was pretty much in every club back then. So it's an interesting story, but I believe, and you guys know, I think they don't use the audio from it. I think they've got maybe some SHURE twinplex hidden inside the mics, or maybe hidden on the actors. I think that's what's going on there. Barry or Fali, you know anything more about that?
Well, probably they are using twinplex. I think the main reason of using twinplex would be two reasons. Reason number one is that the bass response of this microphone is quite bold. It doesn't have that thin sound that a lot of the lav mics do, which is due to that it has two diaphragms on it. The other thing is that people are used to the sound of the handheld microphones, like how natural the SM58 sounds like. And of course, having a mic similar to this, even if it was a 55, and hiding in a twimplex in her would make it sound like it's actually the mic being used. So probably that's what's being used. Yep.
Yep. So if they had actually used Unidyne 2 or Unidyne 1, maybe the audience would be disappointed in the sound because it's a little bit thinner than what we're used to today. That could be that. Yeah.
I agree. Yep.
Yep.
And we've been seeing the evolution of the 55s. It changed the capsule, but I think that another point that is worth highlighting is that it's probably the most copied microphone. The industrial design of it, it's still nowadays so amazing. Who did the design, and where is this design coming from?
Well, I didn't know until about a year and a half ago. The industrial design was created by a gentleman named Wesley SHURE, and Wesley was not an employee of SHURE. He was a contractor. He was hired by SHURE in the late 30s to create graphics, logos, letterheads, and so forth. But one day, Mr. SHURE said to him, "Hey, let's take maybe you can take a crack at this." So Wesley came up with the design of the Unidyne, which is really a classic design. But if the audience members go on to Google sometime and they put in 1937 Oldsmobile Coupe 6 car, you will see that the front end of that grill on that car is exactly what the Unidyne looks like. It has the same number of horizontal grills, the vertical grill down the middle. It's exactly the same. So I think that basically Wesley probably took his design cues from an Oldsmobile. Now, I want one other bit. Mr. SHURE happened to drive Oldsmobile cars. Now, I don't know he had a Coupe 6, but can you imagine one day he walked out, looked at the front of his car and said, "Wes, come over here. Make it look like that." So that's where it came from. And by the way, we have a trademark on the Unidyne look. So that actual appearance of that microphone is a SHURE trademark.
But it's still widely copied.
Yeah, well, I know, but at least we can defend it if we want to. But if they make it seven ribs instead of 8, then it doesn't violate it. So there's various ways to get around that.
And another difference with the second generation, the Unidyne 2, was that it wasn't only cardioid; it was a super cardioid. And probably Fali can explain to our audience what's the difference and what's changing. That.
Yeah, the difference typically between a supercardioid and a cardioid microphone is that the supercardioid's pickup is a little more focused. So you actually reject a little more sound than you would from a cardioid microphone. It's so on really noisy stages, a supercardioid microphone would definitely be your go-to, no question about it. So it's like, you've designed the cardioid microphone first, and then you've taken it to the next level by now making it supercardioid. And I think for that time in history, I think that would have made a lot of people very, very happy.
Yeah, actually, we were going to call it an ultracardioid originally. If you go back and look at Ben Bauer's notebooks, he used the term ultracardioid, and then I'm not sure where super came. Probably the marketing to people got involved, right? They said, let's make it supercardioid instead.
That is one of the points that I've always faced with the people who are new to the industry, because they obviously come and ask you simple questions like, which one is better, a cardioid or supercardioid? Obviously, the super is bringing up that super ingredient. Right. And I always have to tell them, like, it doesn't mean it's supercharged. It's not a supercharger that makes a microphone excel. I mean, sometimes you need to use a cardioid against a supercardioid. What dictates that is where it's going to be located on the stage. So I try to explain more about the polar pattern and how the mic behaves and where it rejects the sound over the word itself, as in a supercardioid. But it's interesting how the terminology that SHURE invented just went viral in the market. I mean, just like the cardioid is. So cardioid and supercardioid are industry standards, despite the manufacturer right now.
Yep.
Okay, I think we have been chatting quite a lot, but it's a birthday and there should be someone singing. So
I
let's
want the cake.
Yeah, what about the cake? And chips.
No,
For the
we wanna
time
stay
being, let's
healthy.
check out the video.
Hi, this is Saurav from Goshai Gang, and this is my small tribute to SM58. You must sing the lows or the highs or the super highs. Everything sounds so great with SM58. A singer's best friend is SM58. I simply love SM58 because of its warm tone and consistent response. Thank you.
So we received quite some birthday wishes for the 58. And Fali, can you tell us something more about this song?
Well, about this song, well, you know what? I don't think we expected the amount of response that we ended up getting, because we thought we'd get like 3 or 4 videos. And I think within a day, I just kept adding videos, and then finally Andre and Marwan had to ask me, like, okay, we've got enough videos now. But like, we got a lot of videos from a lot of people, from sound engineers to obviously singers, but a lot of videos, and some rental companies that started, like, that was the first product they bought when they decided to start a rental company. So it was an SM50, SM58. So really great seeing all the videos that everyone sent it. Really appreciate that.
I think we will see some more of them shortly. But now it's time to go back in time again. And despite the super cardioid, the Unidyne 3, that in my opinion was probably the most revolutionary thing ever, because it's a moment where really technology, the change in technology and the change in society have been hands in hands. The Unidyne 3 was made, and the Unidyne 3 meant the handheld as we know it now. I think Michael is the right person to tell us how it happened.
Well, if you think about singers in the 1940s and the 1950s with a Unidyne 1 or Unidyne 2, it was on a stand, and they would walk up to it, sing, and walk away from it, because I'm sure the sound engineer found, well, that's exactly the spot it should be, so we don't have feedback. And then Elvis comes about, and Chuck Berry comes about, and rock and roll comes about. Now they want to dance around the stage more. And if you take a Unidyne 1 or Unidyne 2 and start dancing around the stage, first it's hard to hold, right? It's big. And you start dancing around the stage, well, then all of a sudden, feedback issues can come out. So the Unidyne 3 comes around, late 50s. Rock and roll is just starting to get going then. And now you've got something very easy to hold in your hand, much lighter weight, and the game before feedback is better. So it happened that, as you mentioned, Andrea, that the technology and society happened to change at the same time. So the first major event that I saw that had all Unidyne 3s used was a telecast in the United States, and it was called like a rock and roll teenage show, and the Rolling Stones were on it, and James Brown was on it, and just like all these major names, and they were all, this is from 1964, and they were all Unidyne 3s, and that was really one of the first major things I'd seen. Great story about that is that James Brown came on and absolutely killed, and the Rolling Stones were on after that, and Mick Jagger was really unhappy that he had to go on after James Brown, who had just killed the audience. And if you watch it closely, you'll actually see Mick Jagger imitate some of the moves that James Brown had just done. So it also was the Beatles, though. The Beatles they never used the SM58 live that I'm aware of, but they did use our Models 545 for a tour. And would you like me to tell you that story now, Andrea, about the Beatles and the 545s?
All right. Please go ahead. I'm a big Beatles fan, by the way.
as am I. So it's 1965, and the Beatles are doing, I think that was the last live tour that they did throughout the United States. And SHURE had gotten, hey, here's a big band, and we came to SHURE Beatles management and said, for your tour, we're going to give you 12 Model 545 microphones, the windscreens, the shock mounts, and everything to take on tour. And all we ask is at the end of it, you return them to SHURE because we're going to auction them off for charity. Great idea. So I've got a great photo somewhere of the Beatles performing in Chicago at Comiskey Ballpark, which is a baseball stadium. And there's the 545s up there, and wonderful. So the tour ends in late August, and a month goes by and 2 months go by, and we don't get the microphones back. SHURE Public Relations Department contacts Beatle management and says, where are those microphones you promised? And the management said, we sent them back a week after the tour was done. And they said, well, who did you send them to? Did you mark anything in there? No, we just sent them back to SHURE Service. We didn't put anything in there. We thought you knew what they were. Well, SHURE Service gets these Beatles microphones back. They have no return address on them, and they didn't know what to do with them. So they scrapped them. And we never had the auction.
Wow.
That's pretty terrible.
Such is history. Boy, would we love to have those microphones now.
My story with the Beatles is that my parents actually went to a concert and they went to see the Beatles.
Wow.
Because according to them, it was impossible to hear anything.
Yeah. Yep. I think you see that. Just the screaming. I mean, the PA systems were relatively rudimentary there. And the screaming, now signal to noise ratio was all wrong.
Yeah. And I've been working in the same arena ages later, and it's still a very challenging one. And if I think that they try to make a concert with 2 small speakers, I can imagine the result was pretty bad.
Yeah, indeed.
But definitely, and one of the reasons probably why the Beatles didn't keep on, one of them is, or didn't keep performing live, was that technology wasn't ready yet for that kind of event.
Yeah. Yeah,
and but I think that just few years later, things changed pretty much because the Summer of Love, the festivals, they started to take more and more place, and technology started to move probably a little more quickly in that direction.
Yeah, the SM56 came out in 1964. That's just like an SM57, except it has a pistol grip stand mount on it. And the SM microphones, they were aimed at the studio market. That's what SM stood for, studio market. We were trying to sell it to radio and television studios and so forth. But there was a touring sound rental company in San Francisco, and called Harry McCune Sound, and they were hired to create these large outdoor festivals that were happening in the Summer of Love, which you mentioned. And they did one in Monterey Pop, called Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. And when you see the video of that, there's a guy named Pennebaker who did a documentary of it. All the microphones, there were 2 stages. One stage had AKG mics on. The main stage had all SHURE SM56s. And SM56s were the main vocal microphones, and they were the main microphones on the back line as well. And that really set the stage for SHURE becoming a primary supplier of microphones for them, because McCune Sound did things in San Francisco, they did things in Los Angeles, and no matter where they went, they always used the SHURE SM56s. And that's when all of a sudden the microphone that we thought were going to be a big hit in radio and TV was a big hit on live rock and roll stages.
And it ended up to be used, our microphones ended up to be used extensively at Woodstock as well, but it wasn't only the mic.
Yeah, well, it was, if you see the Woodstock, they were all Model 565s. They were 565 microphones with an adapter on them because we had Amphenol connectors on them there, and they wanted XLRs. So you'll notice if you see close-ups, you see this little 1-inch extension on the end of a microphone, which goes from Amphenol to XLR. So Bill Hanley was guy I actually happen to know. He's still alive at 84 and still as cranky as ever. So he was a sound engineer, and he had a rental company, and he had been using the 565s for rentals. And so when this came about, he knew that, number one, it was going to be a tough environment, rain, wind, and volunteers. All the people on stage mostly were volunteers. So he decided to use just the same microphone for everything. So there were about 20 or 24 565s, and they were used on guitar amps and vocals and for everything, because the sound people on stage, they didn't know how to select the microphones for that. So they would just say, put a microphone on the guitar amp, all right? And they would move the microphone over there. That was the 565. Bill had built a special console. I think it was a 12 or 16 channel console to use there. But it's outdoors, it's rainy, it's humid, and so forth. And his console started to break down. So he switched over and actually did all the mixing for that on SHURE M67 portable mixers, which were designed for broadcast. So here it is, microphones that were designed for broadcast, mixers that were designed for broadcast, all being used for live sound. Pretty amazing. But if you see the Woodstock movie, all you see are Model 565 mics.
I think that from a technical point of view, Barry, I don't know if you agree with me, one of the major qualities of Unidyne 3 capsules and SM58 is that you can use them virtually on everything. Probably, if they ask me, okay, you need to make a gig, and they don't tell me the instruments I have to put a mic on, I definitely go for 58. What do you think?
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, looking at the frequency response of this microphone, I mean, it goes from easily from 40 hertz to about 15 or 16 kilohertz. I mean, this is just quite enough for most of the instruments. Not mentioning that since it's a dynamic microphone and it has a very good pneumatic shock mount, which is what prevents the shock or the stand on the stage to convert the sound into the diaphragm. It works for pretty much everything. And if you look at a lot of the drum kits today, they are mostly mic'd up with 57s or equivalent to 57s. There's like the Beta 56, which is a supercardioid version of that. But I mean, sound-wise, it's pretty much the same. The mic excels on guitars until today. It's a workhorse for guitars, both 57 and 58. Not mentioning that both are actually a Unidyne 3. And if you just remove the grill of the 58, it becomes a 57. So if somebody gave me a 58, 20 of them, and asked me to do a show with that, you're going to find 58s with or without caps on different parts of the stage, and it will still work. Even on kicks, bass amps, I've used the 58 on bass amps, and it sounds really good. Probably not going to get the low end like you expect, but I mean, there are ways around that where you can actually just push the low end a bit further, and you still get a decent sound out of a single, simple microphone like a 58.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you mentioned, Michael, and maybe you want to tell us more about it, is that SM58 stands for studio microphones, and they were meant to be used in broadcast.
Yep. So around 1963, there was a guy working at SHURE named Bob Carr, and he was put in charge of being the marketing manager, a one-person department, to try to build our market presence in the broadcasting field. At the time, Electro-Voice in the United States was the broadcast market. So he looked at microphones that we already had in the line and decided to turn them into studio microphones. And how did he do that? Well, first of all, they were painted like a dark, non-reflective gray so they wouldn't reflect lights in the studios. If they had an on-off switch on, that was removed so that someone on stage couldn't turn the microphone off. They were changed to XLR connectors because the broadcasters like that. And they were all balanced low impedance. So he didn't invent any new microphones. He basically took microphones that we had already and kind of did a paint job on them and a few changes to the characteristics. So that's what we were pushing. And when the first SM line came out in 1963, it was about 5 or 6 models. The SM56 and 57 and 58 were them, but that's what SM stood for, studio microphones. So we tried for 6 years, from 1964 to 1970, to sell them into studios, and they didn't want them. They were so set with Electro-Voice microphones that they just really didn't want it. And in 1970, believe it or not, the SM56 and the SM57 and the SM58 were being considered for discontinuation because they weren't selling well. And they certainly weren't cracking the market that we were aiming them at, which was the radio and the TV market. Fortunately, there was a guy working there named Roger Ponto, and Roger Ponto was the director of sales for the United States. Interestingly enough, he's also the guy that made the mistake of hiring me in 1976. But Roger had some contacts in Las Vegas. And he said, well, before we discontinue these, let me take them out to Las Vegas and see if the SM57s and the 56s and the 58s, let's see if they work good for live sound. Maybe we can use them on live stages for sound reinforcement in Las Vegas. And of course, they worked extremely well. And between that combination and the rock and roll market starting to pick it up, but it took about 10 years before the microphones really took off. So that's where it came from. So, but SM does not stand for SHURE microphone. It stands for studio microphone. So sometimes you're lucky. You bring out a product for something here, and then the world says, no, it's really much better over there. And then you look like a genius when you were just lucky.
And how happy was the creator of the 58 about it being used in the rock and roll market?
Ernie Seeler was really unhappy because he hated rock and roll music. If it had been used for classical music, he would have been ecstatic because he was a big classical music fan. But he was not a fan of rock, and that always just annoyed him.
Another interesting thing that we touched is like how the change of a society and the change in technology have been working next to each other, and I think that the part of a successful 58 it's related to his robustness. The story that always comes to my mind is Woodstock, the one I saw, 1994, where Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor and his band are just covered in mud going to stage. They had to change almost every single instrument, every single mic probably on stage or whatever it was possible to change, but not the 58 on the main vocal. And it's been used and abused by many singers. One of them being Roger Daltrey, and I know you have a story about it.
Yeah, Roger's a very good friend of SHURE's and a fan of SHURE's, and he's been using the SM58 since around 1966. He really adopted it quite early. And you may know that, number one of the things he does on stage is he basically twirls the microphone on the end of the cable. So there's two stories. We'll talk about the SM58 that failed and what happened there, but let's first of all talk about why Roger twirls the SM58. Well, according to Roger, when the Who was first starting to get together, particularly and play out in the late 60s, Peter Townsend would take solos that would just go on forever. And Daltrey was bored. He was just bored with these solos going on, so he starts swinging the microphone. And eventually he says that he got it that he could actually swing the microphone and clip the cigarette out of Townsend's mouth if he was playing too long. So I just envisioned that this was something he would do just because he was bored. And you can imagine those two guys, they've been married together for over, for like 60 years now. And it's probably like an old couple. They just probably wanted to do it to annoy each other, right? Townsend played long solos to annoy Daltrey, and Daltrey swang the mic to annoy Townsend. You can just imagine that, right? Particularly you front of house guys, you know what goes on behind the scenes with bands, and you got to know that's true. But Roger had one and only one SM58 that ever failed for him, and he sent it back to SHURE. He was not upset. He just wanted to know, why did this one fail and all the rest of them didn't? So we got it back. And the first thing we did was we put it in our X-ray machine, and we X-rayed the cable as it came out of the mic at the bottom. So there was the XLR connector at the bottom, the female that went into the mic, and then there was a cable and a sharp bend. Well, it turned out that the sharp bend was so sharp that the cable inside the wires inside the mic cable had broken, and the SM58 worked perfectly well. We were going to send it back to Roger, but he was so happy, he said, you can keep that. So if you ever visit the SHURE archives, you can see a Roger Daltrey SM58 microphone all taped up with white gaffer's tape, holding the microphone and holding the cable. And so that's why he uses it. And yeah, he's a character. He's a funny guy.
And there was also an exchange with Mrs. Rose SHURE, right?
Yeah. So I think it was 2008 when they were going on, what was it, maybe their 50th anniversary tour or something along those lines. And Mrs. SHURE wrote a lovely letter to Roger Daltrey and talking to him about just how his vision of swinging that microphone has inspired so many other people to buy the SM58s. And so Roger was just thrilled to death to get this letter from Mrs. SHURE. And we have that letter, a copy of that letter in the archive. Yeah, that was in 2008.
I hope I will be able soon to come back to Chicago.
Me too. I'd like to go back to the headquarters.
You're not.
Well, I went back for the first time for 2 days, but yeah, it's strange.
One thing that I remember from my previous visit is the Vagabond 88. You may know that I work a lot with RF and wireless, and it was quite shocking to me to find out that we introduced the wireless microphones before the shock mount and an actual microphone that could handle handling.
Yep, 1953, the Vagabond came out, and it was Ben Bauer. Remember Ben Bauer? 1947, he wrote a memo to Mr. Shure at the time and just said, I've got this idea. I think I've got a way that we can eliminate the cable between the microphone and the amplifier. And so that was like 6 years in development, and it came out in 1953. It was the Vagabond 88, had 5 vacuum tubes inside of it, a 30-volt battery and a 1.5-volt battery, and it would transmit, it would guarantee you that it could transmit at least 10 meters.
That was still too great for what we were used to, for what people were used to see.
Yep. It would be, in today's dollars, it would be $7,000 for a single system. And it operated at 2 megahertz.
And it's still like as big as a cupboard, the receiver, if I remember correctly.
The receiver is big, but the handheld microphone is about the size of today's transmitters. It's really not that much larger.
I think in the pictures it looks like a washing machine behind.
Oh, it's not that large. It's it's as large as a bread box, if you will. Something you would put your bread into, something like that. It's not as large as a washing machine.
So we clarified a little bit the first part of the name, that is the SM part, but we didn't mention how it happened for the 58 to be called 58.
It's pretty boring. we had used 55 before, 55 and then 55S, and then we came out with the SM56, and then the SM57, and then the SM58. That's it. There's nothing more difficult than that. The one thing, SHURE has historically used the number 5 as the first model number in dynamic microphones. Of course, now that's changed with the KSM8. But for many years, if it started out with a 5, it meant it was a dynamic mic, and a 4 was a controlled magnetic, and a 3 was a ribbon microphone. That was Mr. SHURE's. He was just a logical guy. He wanted that. But 55, 56, 57, 58, and later we'll tell you about the 59.
We got a question from our audience, and I won't try to pronounce the name of the guy who asked the question. No, I can't. Arnab. And I'd address this question to Fali, because he's probably the last one who left the mixing desk to join SHURE. And it's, what's your favorite preamp for an SM58?
Man, yeah, I don't even think there's a favorite anymore, because when I started working, we used to use these ginormous either Yamaha or analog consoles, and it worked there. And now in the latest trend as far as digital stuff, it works here. It's just one of those where if you're not sure of what mic to get and how to use it, whatever, take a 58, plug the XLR in, turn up a little gain, and start using it. So and it's, when it comes to favorite preamps, yeah, I mean, I have some pretty expensive preamps, but it's something where you can plug into $100 preamp and it'll sound great, and you plug it into $1,000 preamp and it'll also sound great. So there's no real great or the most favorite preamp, I'd say, for the SM58. You just plug it into anything, and the mic does the work for you, basically.
Barry, perhaps you can highlight if there is any technical reason why the 58 sounds great virtually on every preamp.
Well, I mean, before I talk technically, there's a story that I heard from a desk manufacturer. Probably a lot of people know Alan Neath. So in their R&D stage, they were deciding between different preamps. So they have this properly calibrated state-of-the-art room with a PA system there that is, they spent almost millions to make it sound this way. And of course, they have their desk and they have their preamps. So one of our representatives from the company was telling me that they invited a lot of engineers and they wanted to choose between different mics on which mic can be the reference microphone to decide on which preamp then to use on those desks. And they were surprised that they invited one engineer and he came in with nothing. And they asked him which microphone of your choice is going to be. He goes like, oh, don't worry. He reached out to his pocket with an SM58 and he plugged it in with various preamps and he've chosen one against the rest. And they asked him the exact same question that we got today, is like, what makes you choose this one? And the answer was that this microphone, first, you know the sound of the microphone before you even plug it in. And even I think any front of house engineer knows that the moment you plug in an SM58, you would tell if it's a working SM58, if it's completely destroyed, or if it's a counterfeit. I mean, there is only one of these three different choices. And because that mic sounds so, let's say, so familiar to us as engineers, there is no way out that you would not be able to judge anything else. Like, I cannot explain to you how I totally know the sound of this mic in my head before I plug it in. So if I plug it in into a preamp and the preamp sucks, I would know that. If I plug it into a preamp and a preamp is really good, I would tell. You can hear everything from the lowest frequencies up to the highest frequencies for vocals. I mean, there's nobody who's going to tell me, well, you can go up to 22 kilohertz on certain microphones. Tell me, get me a vocalist who can do 22 kilohertz, and then we can talk. So, I mean, without getting too technical, honestly, about this microphone, is like, I fold it. I can tell if an SM58 or an SM57 is used on stage before I even open my eyes and see it. That's how basic I can go about it.
You know, so further to that point.
Oh, sorry. Please.
Sorry. Further to that point, Barry. You know, there's. I used to always check PA systems by playing music, and then I like, this was back in the day, and then I came across a lot of people that would just check it with an SM58. And then I came across a few other people that would actually check the subs on the PA system with an SM58. And the moment I saw that, I was like, man, that's too cool to pass off. I'm not playing any music anymore. So for anyone that's interested, so if you hold an SM58 and you remove the high pass and turn up some subs on that and actually tap on the grill, it can pretty much sound like a kick drum. That's the way you test out your subs. Like, you don't have music or stuff like that. Yeah, just send some subs to your SM58 channel and tap on the grill. That's what we
love it.
Okay, let's go back to the party mood, and I think we have some more video to watch. So let's check it out.
Happy SM58 Day to the industry standard SHURE SM58.
We all know about a legendary microphone that was made in 1966 and till today is the industry standard.
I've been a SHURE mic advocate for the past 10 years plus now.
I've been using the SM58 mic for a long time and it's still one of my favorite mics.
I love the SM58 SHURE microphone because it's durable.
The clarity, the diaphragm, the production.
For performing, even for recording in the studio.
You know that grunge that it gives the vocals?
It's a mainstay in my arsenal.
The best live sound application microphone I have ever used.
Happy SM58 Day.
SM58.
No stage is complete without it.
And we are back. So we have been talking about a lot of wins for the 58. It's been adopted initially in the live industry, and then it became the Swiss knife of microphone, the microphone that you can use to test the subs or to tune a preamp. And probably it sounds good on every preamp because they don't release the preamp if it doesn't sound good on an SM58. But there is one thing that the SM58 didn't make, because the 57 got the job. And it's one of the most prestigious job, actually. That's the mic of the White House, the presidential mic. Can you tell us more, Michael, about this choice?
I can. From 1990 to 2015, part of my job was being SHURE's liaison to the White House. So I actually was there working with the first Bush, Clinton, the second Bush, and Mr. Obama. So I knew a lot about the history. So it was actually in 1965, the same year that the SM57 came out, that White House Communications Agency, WHCA, which I will now use the term WACA, because that's what they do. WACA first decided to try to use the SM57 with the president at the time, that was Lyndon Johnson. And before that, they actually didn't have any coordination as far as what microphone to use with the president. The president would go somewhere to speak, and whatever microphone was there worked out, is what they used. And so you can imagine the quality sometimes was good, the quality was sometimes was bad. And they thought that was not a good idea. A gentleman named Lee Gunter worked at SHURE at the time, and he had worked in the military during World War II. And so he knew people at White House Communications Agency, and he went to them and said, you might want to try this. One thing that I want to mention is that Electro Voice, a great company, also wanted to have their microphones, but they came to the White House Communications Agency and they said, we will give you as many microphones as you want. You cannot do that. That's considered a bribe. And so what SHURE offered to the White House Communications Agency was, try this microphone out, and if you like it, we'll be glad to offer you technical support and whatever else, but you have to buy them. And so they have used the SM57 from 1966 all the way through 2020. There have been 4 microphones up there. There's been 3. There's been 2. There's currently 1. They currently own over 400 SM57s. They've never had a failure in that entire time period. I also like to say you've heard more lies through SM57s than you've ever and accurately reproduced as well. So currently, why did they use the 57s? Well, the primary reason is they looked at the 58s, but they wanted to have the ability to have different size windscreens on the SM57. So, of course, we have the A2WS, which is the smaller one, and we have that large one, the A81WS, which you'll sometimes see when the president's outside or when it's raining or whatever. So the 57s, basically, they could have no windscreens, a small windscreen, or a large windscreen. And that's the primary reason they went with them. But that 25 years where I was liaison with the White House was a very, very interesting time of my life. And I would go to their agency. And I just have to tell you this quick story. It was such a serious place to get into. You imagine the security checks, right? But you would be in their agency, and there would be signs on the door that would say, unauthorized entrance will be met with deadly force. You knew not to go in there. That was just the bathroom. Anyway, so that's how the 57 came about. And again, they're still using it. And I expect when the new president gets elected that they will still be there. They'll probably go back to the 2 microphone setup that they used before. The current 1 microphone setup, nobody likes that except the guy using it. And he will remain nameless.
But what was the purpose of the double miking? Because I heard any kind of urban legend about it. So,
well, you have to realize that the White House Communications Agency is a military organization, and so the people there cycle through all the time. So there's always a general or a colonel that runs it. So the first time when they started using it with Johnson, they actually at one time had 4 microphones up there, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. And the reason for that was the general at the time said, darn it, under my command, there will never be a microphone failure. And so he didn't want to be the one that was blamed for it. Well, of course, having 4 microphones up there didn't look very good. Eventually, they moved to 3 microphones in a triangle in front. You can see that for the first time with Richard Nixon in the early 1970s. 1 mic fed public address, 1 mic fed the feed for broadcast, and 1 mic fed recordings for the National Archives. So they had 3 separate signal paths. So, and they could also switch them if they wanted to. Then the famous story is, so they used the 3 microphone setup from Nixon to Ford to Carter to Reagan, and now it's the late 1980s, and George Bush, the first one, was president. And there was an infamous thing that happened, and you can find photos of this online. George Bush was tall. He was probably 6'2", 6'3", and they build each president his own lectern so it matches his size. Well, the Queen of England was coming over to talk, and she's very short. She's probably a foot a foot shorter than Mr. Bush. So it was in the Rose Garden outside the White House. And when the Queen was going to come up to talk, someone was supposed to put a stool so she would stand on the stool and be the proper height. And they forgot. And all you saw was this hat and 3 microphones where her face should have been. And the British press went crazy. They just went crazy with this. The next day I get this really frantic call from Waka. Now, they don't blame the fact there wasn't a stool. They blame the microphones. And they said to me, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I was not in a very good mood that day. And I said, well, it was a 3rd microphone. Why don't you take a hacksaw and saw off the middle microphone? And that's exactly what they did. And so you'll see at the beginning of Bush president number 1, 3 microphones, and about halfway through it, it went down to 2 microphones. And what they did was then one microphone was for PA, and the second microphone was split electronically to feed broadcast and recording. Ah, man, I used to have hair before I started working with the White House. So that's how it went from 4 to 3 to 2. And now 1 is the current president. It's his idea, and no one likes it except for him, as I mentioned.
I don't like it aesthetically either.
I don't either. No one does. Try to tell him anything, Andrea.
No, I'm not in that position.
Politics sucks anyway, so I think that's the fragments of it.
Yep, exactly right. So there's your White House story.
Now I'm starting to see signs, and but I have one more question for you. So we had the 56, 57, 58, but we never had the 59.
We did. The SM59 came out in 1977 and lasted about 10 or 15 years. But I have a story for you on that. So the SM57 was a dynamic mic. It had a very flat response, unlike the peaked response of the 58. It had a very good internal shock mount, even better than the 58s. And it was, I don't think it was particularly attractive. It really, if you see it, it looks very much like something designed in the 1970s. Anyway, so I've been at SHURE for about a year. My boss, Roger Ponto, at the time, we're in Las Vegas because we were showing our microphones to our Las Vegas soundmen. And one day he says to me, hey, I know Frank Sinatra is rehearsing over at Caesar's Palace. Could you take this over and let him try it out at a rehearsal? Now, I didn't know, I knew who Frank Sinatra was, of course, but I didn't know much about the politics of artists. So I'm like, okay, boss, I'll do that. So I go over to Caesar's Palace and I talk to Dave Rogers, and Dave Rogers is the house sound man. And he said, oh, yeah, I can get Sinatra sound guy to try this, no problem. So he tells me, you wait in the sound booth. And it's sound booth's probably 100 feet away from the stage. And Dave takes the SM59 down to the stage and starts talking to Sinatra sound man. And I'm far away and I can't hear what's going on. But I see this really animated conversation going back and forth. And I can see that maybe this is not going so well. Eventually, Sinatra's sound man just kind of shrugs his shoulders and goes, and so he goes over to the SM58, which is on the stand, and replaces it with the SM59. And Dave Rogers comes back to the sound booth. He's all happy. He's going to try it out. It's going to be great. So Sinatra comes out, and Sinatra says hello to the band and so forth. And he looks at the microphone. It's not his SM58. It's this new weird-looking space-age microphone. And the first thing he says is, I will clean this up. Where's my friendly SM58? Even though it didn't use the word friendly. And the sound man over on the side says, well, Frank, this is a new microphone from SHURE. Will you try it out? And he just kind of goes, okay. So the first tune they do is his opening number called Come Fly With Me. Little did I know that's what was going to happen very quickly. And so he sings about 8 bars, and he takes the microphone off the stand, and he throws it as hard as he can off to the left. And the microphone goes boom, 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 bounces along the stage, hits the wall, and Sinatra says, "Give me my SM58." And his sound man runs over, unplugs the SM59, plugs in the 58, puts it back on the stand. Sinatra's happy. Rehearsal goes on. So during the next tune, the sound man, Sinatra's sound man, comes up to the sound booth where I'm at, and I think my eyes are like this. And he comes to me and he says quietly, he didn't like it. And so I took it and headed out of there. So suffice to say, Sinatra didn't like it. In hindsight, I know exactly why he didn't like it. There's 10 reasons he didn't like it. And the SM59 never was very popular. So, but that was my one and only close encounter with Mr. Sinatra. And I learned a lesson. You know, you don't change a microphone on an artist that's used to a certain microphone. It's like coming up to a guitar player and say, yeah, I know you play that Telecaster, but here, play the Les Paul tonight. You know, it's just not going to work well.
Doesn't work very well.
Doesn't work very well.
It reminds me of a story that I lived when I joined SHURE. My boss at the time told me, you know, we have different series. He was explaining me the product lines. We have a PG entry series, and then we have a professional SM, and then beta that is better than the 58. I was sorry, no. Even if I just joined, I was already who I am. It's like, no, sorry, but for me, there is no mic that can say I'm better than the 58. So let's make the things clear.
Right. Different, yes, but not better. Yeah.
But we did something. Actually, of course, we did a lot as a company in terms of microphones and in terms of vocal microphones. I'm not referring to this modern technologies, array microphone that, in my opinion, one day will be used for rock and roll, but maybe this is not yet the day. But I'm related mostly towards, I'm looking at the Beta 58 and the KSM8 in terms of vocal microphones are the first two that come to my mind. So, but we have quite a lot of history with the dynamic handheld vocal microphones. What's been changed in this year, and how the new mics are not better, but different from the 58?
I know Barry's a fan of the KSM8. You want to talk about the KSM8, Barry?
Well, yeah, with pleasure, of course. I mean, first I'd like to elaborate on the part that it's historical about the 58. It's like, if you look at the people used to the microphone and so used to the imperfections of proximity effect with microphones, like, you know, if you look at the community in hip hop, at beatboxing, they all rely on the proximity effect of the microphone. So there's a solution to this. So certain musicians would be very happy about a solution to the proximity effect, which exists in the KSM8. So the KSM8 is a dual diaphragm dynamic microphone that actually combats the issue with the proximity effect. So people who are playing instruments, they do not need to lean forward to kiss the mic every time they want to sing. And the sweet spot is definitely wider. But again, can we say, is it better or worse? Again, it's controversial. You give it to a beatboxer, he's going to hate it, just like Frank Sinatra. Definitely is going to throw it left stage or right stage. You talk about a hip hopper who loves cupping the mic. You cup the KSM8, you'll hate it with vengeance. It's one of the mics that really hates cupping, versus an SM58 that gives you that bold mids when you cup it, while it's still stable and tolerant to this. Because we as sound engineers, the first thing we do when we tune the microphone on stage, we cup it, we tune it in that worst case scenario. Then, you know, sky's the limit, go cup it, do whatever you want with it. But certain mics doesn't. But again, I mean, would the KSM8 be the future? To me as an engineer, I love this microphone. There is nothing that I've used this microphone that I didn't love the sound of. Would I replace the SM58 with? The answer is no. So again, I love how Andrea said different. It's like, is Fali better than Andrea? No, I love both guys. They're both my colleagues. They're both our engineers. There's no reason why I wouldn't love both. So simple as this.
Okay, guys, I think it's time for us to wrap up the conversation. Thank you very much to the three of you for joining me today and having this little party.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Now it's time to go and cut the cake.
Yeah, let's have it stage center.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I'll see you hopefully very soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Legend, icon, The industry standard for over 40 years, the SHURE SM58 professional vocal microphone could certainly coast on its reputation. But this is one legend whose story is still being written. Night after night, stage after stage, session after session. There's a reason the SM58 continues to be used, abused, trusted, and beloved by music industry giants the world over. In fact, there are a lot of reasons. It starts with the technology. SHURE invented it and continues to perfect it. Every unidirectional dynamic microphone that's followed the SM58 utilizes the same core components, but only the SM58 is hand-assembled to SHURE's rigorous specifications. Its bass roll-off and bright and mid-range help your voice cut through the mix. A consistent cardioid polar pattern minimizes background noise and reduces the possibility of feedback. And its custom-designed pneumatic shock mount virtually eliminates stage vibration and handling noise. So the only thing that comes through the SM58 is your voice, clear and true. But sound quality is only part of the SM58 story. Its tank-like toughness is the stuff to make roadies wax poetic. Built to military specs, the SM58 has been subjected to the sort of abuse that'll make Armageddon seem like just another day at the office. And it always keeps performing. It may end up with a dented grill, but that's by design. The grill acts as a crumple zone, protecting the cartridge inside without affecting the sound, and dented grills can always be replaced, or brandished with pride, like old battle scars. It's no wonder countless artists from across the musical landscape, from up-and-comers to bona fide superstars, trust one mic and one mic only. It's no wonder the legend of the SM58 just keeps on growing. For more information, visit SHURE.com.